Hello and welcome back to Union Voices, the Model European Union Berlin podcast. And just like in last year's episodes, we invite experts to talk about recent and relevant topics. And I'm very happy that for today's episode, I have one such guest, and it is Dr. Lena Gumnior, who is a member of the Bundestag, a politician of the Green Party, and a lawyer. And she's also head of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Consumer Protection. And today we will talk about a very recent, very relevant topic, consent-based law regarding sexual crimes, or the Only Yes Means Yes project. And for starters, I would ask you to introduce yourself a little bit, maybe talk about your personal background, what made you go into politics, what made you become a lawyer, and what made you so interested in criminal law.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the nice introduction. Yes, I'm a lawyer. I'm a member of parliament for the Green Party since 2025. So I had my 1-year anniversary in parliament recently, and I mainly work in the fields of criminal law and criminal procedure law because that's what I did before I became member of parliament. As you said, I'm also a lawyer. I studied law after I finished high school because I didn't really know what to do else. So I thought, yeah, it could be interesting and I'm good with words. So why not try to study law? And I'm lucky because I really liked it. But when you study law in Germany, I think it's comparable to studying law in other European countries as well. You study all the different fields of law, like civil law, criminal law, and also public law. But what really drew my attention was criminal law ever since I started studying law, because I found the question about what do we consider a criminal offense and what don't we consider a criminal offense as a society particularly interesting. And I quickly volunteered at the German Lawyers Association, which is an NGO that works on all legal issues that are related to gender equality. And in this Lawyers Association, I worked in the Criminal Law Commission, and we dealt with all questions related to gender equality and criminal law. And I specifically worked on the implementation of the so-called Istanbul Convention in Germany, so a convention that protects women against gender-based violence, or mainly women. And I saw that the legal system that we have in Germany is heavily male-dominated and has been male-dominated for all the years because there were always less women represented in parliament than there were men. And I thought I really want to create a counterbalance, and that also drew my attention to this feminist approach to criminal law. And I was also active in the Green Party, so this kind of came together what I did in law school, what I did at the Women Lawyers Association, and what I did at the Green Party, and that made me run for parliament. And now I'm really happy that I can actually work on these topics in parliament.
Thank you for that introduction. Of course, I took a look at your website and, everything I could find about you. And on your website, you say that you are pursuing a feminist and evidence-based legal policy. But what does that actually mean in practice? And what does that mean specifically when we talk about criminal law?
Yeah, often when we hear about things that happen in our society that we as a society would disagree or that we don't like, often politicians tend to say, okay, maybe this should be a criminal offense, or maybe we need higher penalties. So we have often emotional reactions to things that happen in our society, and then we promise something that we can not actually realistically achieve with criminal law and with penalties. So what I mean when I talk about an evidence-based approach is that we replace this emotional reaction with actual empirical research and scientific assessments, and that we see what can we do to really effectively reduce crimes in our society. So I want to prioritize reducing recidivisms so that no crimes are going to be offended by the same person again. And I really want to have a system where we have a good public safety and good preventive measures to actually prevent crimes and not only react to when something has already happened. And this needs more public resources than it needs to make a new criminal law. So we tend to just make more and more criminal laws, and we don't talk about the real roots of problems. So we know from scientific research that simply increasing the severity of a punishment does not actually lower conviction rates or deter crimes, but good policy that focuses on good social standards actually helps to lower crime rates. And as I said before, I also like to take this feminist approach to criminal law to focus on those crimes that mostly affect women and that happened in the dark because no one shed light on these crimes and no one wanted to talk about them. But I want to put them like where they belong, in the center of our attention, because most women will be affected by crimes during their lifetime, and not enough people speak about it.
Yeah, that's very important because after all, women are half of the planet's population. So it does affect half of the planet's population. And then
Exactly.
we also don't talk about the men that it affects or the
Yeah.
people who are neither. So this actually affects a lot of people. So I guess that, that is a very important topic to talk about. And I feel like in recent years, people have started talking more and more about gender-based violence, sexual violence, especially in Europe, where recently, like a month ago, I think the EU Parliament voted on the Only Yes Means Yes bill. Why do you think that discussions about gender-based or sexual crimes have become so prominent now, as opposed to like 10 years ago or in 5 years? Or yeah.
Yeah, I really share this because when I started at the Women Lawyers Association and I gave talks about gender-based violence, this was really like a topic that was only covered by a few people. And now we have like big media houses also in Germany covering these topics. So we really have a shift. And I think it has there are different reasons. I think one is that survivors have fought for this recognition that they now get, particularly for decades. When we look at global movements like the Me Too movement, that also like catalyzed a shift in the public consciousness. And we also have a global rise of women in political offices. I think that this is also something that helps to put a spotlight on these topics, and they put a pressure on these topics also with the help of feminist organizations that also promote consent-based legislation, for example, in Germany. And also we had significant cases all around the globe, like the case of Gisèle Pelicot in France or the Epstein files. And that also generated an intense public pressure and a public awareness that we haven't had before. And it also exposed the inadequacies that we have in our current legislation. And it also showed that we have to change something to make this a better world for people who become victims of gender-based violence.
As you have just said, there have been very well-known cases recently, and that has also led to this public debate about consent. What is consent? How should we define it? How should we actually make policies about it? Like, how can you prove that someone said yes or no? And I already said that in the EU, this bill was passed that only yes means yes. And there is also in Germany, politicians, especially of the Green Party, want this law in Germany too, as opposed to the no means no law that has been in effect for a few years in Germany already. So what does a concept-based approach to sexual crimes actually mean from a legal perspective, and how is it different from the no means no law?
Yeah, exactly. We had this no means no approach in Germany for now 10 years. So we thought it would be time to take the next step. And we introduced a bill into parliament for a yes means yes approach around 6 weeks ago, and it's still in the parliamentary process, so we don't have a final decision on it. But in our bill, we state that consent must be present for every participant and apply to all specific actions throughout the sexual encounter. This means that silence or the absence of a no does not legally equate to a yes. But this is like the current state that we have. If someone stays quiet or just doesn't say no actively, the other person would not commit a crime. And we always, or we see, or we know from scientific research that often victims of these crimes do not behave like the law wants us to behave. So we know cases where the women, for example, freeze, or they cry, or they are not able to show physical resistance, or they just show a passive surrendering. And this, under the current legislation, would not be considered as a sexual assault, but under a yes means yes approach, you need to actively agree to a sexual encounter. So this consent would no longer be implied like it is now, but you have to give it actively. And we hope, when looking at other states that already have implemented bills that are similar, that the legal responsibility shifts toward the defendant to ensure that the consent was actively given, instead of the situation that we have now, that the victim has to prove that they communicated their no clearly enough. So the questions that are asked in court would be different. And so the focus is no longer on the victim to say, did you take the steps to actually say no, but there would be on the defendant to ask them, did you take reasonable steps to confirm a yes? And also the current situation that we have in Germany, they rely on this so-called objektiver Empfänger, would be the German word. It's like an objective observer. So we don't ask, was it possible for the victim or the defendant to see that the victim did not give consent, but we ask a third person who could be in the room, would you consider this a no, or would you not consider this a no? And we want to replace this quite outdated model with a much stricter requirement. If there was no clear voluntary agreement, the act is legally defined as assault, regardless how a bystander would have seen the situation. And in this case, or with this view, we can see, or we can cover all the cases of passive surrendering or freezing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that very thorough explanation. I think it's very important to talk about the difference between those two concepts, because, as you said, it shifts the responsibility to prove from the victim to the defendant. And when you think of a victim of sexual assault, these people, mostly women, have gone through a lot already. And then to have this burden of also having to prove that, yes, actually, I did say no, or, I did not consent to this. To me, it feels like this makes it easier for victims to come forward and actually press charges, because then they are not burdened with having to prove that they actually didn't want that. If the defendant is now the one who has to prove that, yes, I did explicitly hear them say, I want that.
Yes, exactly. And we see that 90% or around about 90% of the people in Germany who become a victim of a sexual assault don't go to the police. So we have to ask ourselves as politicians, why do people not trust the police with the ongoing process? And when we talk to NGOs who work with these victims, they often say that they also tell them, okay, if the situation is not clear enough, maybe don't go through the whole process of going to the police, going to court, maybe just seek help differently, because the pressure is just too much for the victims. And I really think that we have a responsibility to change this.
Especially since we see that most people, or the vast majority of people who do suffer from sexual assaults, do not go through the whole legal process because they're scared that it was not a clear enough case. This often, I feel like, in society leads to people saying or thinking that it is less of a problem than it actually is, because there is not enough official cases. And I feel like a law like that would change that, or would help change that, would help more people come forward, and therefore like shift the view on it as a
Exactly.
societal problem.
Yeah.
Yep. And since we already, or you already mentioned that these NGOs that victims can go to at the moment often discourage them from going the legal path or pressing charges, there is like this societal implication too, that society has a big role on whether victims themselves feel like they are a victim or they have actually been assaulted. So we know that societies play a role, but how big is that role? How important are those societal opinions and norms for a topic like that?
Yeah, I think we cannot underestimate the social attitudes. They are really important because, as I said before, the criminal law, it just comes into place when a crime has been committed. So the prevention effect also of the yes means yes approach will be not bigger than a no means no approach. But also criminal law has like a communicative function into the society. So we decide as a society what kind of behavior we want to punish and what kind of behavior we don't want to punish. And also this has like a communicative effect into our society already. But we also see that like sexual violence is deeply rooted in our particle structures, in our whole society, specifically shown in the forms of male possessiveness or in the objectification of women. And recent studies also have shown that a conservative misogynistic shift in Gen Z males are alarming, and that these attitudes also produces or reproduces environments and frameworks that allow sexual violence to flourish. And this also shows that violence is normalized and downplayed, and we have to counter this patriarchal structures that are already in our society and get recreated. So we cannot just stay with a new criminal law, but we have to combine it with a big shift or trying to shift the ways our society looks at gender roles, how our society looks at patriarchal structures, how our society looks at violence, and is it something that we in some parts just accept, or is it something that we see like a no-go, and that when we as being parts of a society, parts of peer groups, do we say something if we have the feeling that something is going wrong in our peer group or in our family, or do we just look away? And also this is a very important part to shift our societal views, but criminal law can be like one puzzle piece to change this, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So we see criminal law as a way to influence the societal norms, the way we view things. We already talked about how the EU has passed this only yes means yes bill, and that in Germany it is currently being discussed. And you also said that in other European countries they already have a similar law. If we compare the European countries or the EU countries, where do you think Germany would fall in this ranking of laws?
Yeah, I think we fall behind. And this is what I also always say when I talk to my colleagues from other parties, because I always say, like, we would not be the people like in the front, like Germany would not be one of the first, but could become one of the last countries to adopt a consent-based approach. We have recently seen a change in the legal framework in France, and it was only possible after the case of Gisèle Pelicot, because then there was this societal shift that people said, okay, we need to change this. And I think this is crucial, that you have a momentum that you can use. And it built a global movement, and also people in Germany talk about this case. And of course, we have Spain, who has always been a leader in this field, and also had a yes means yes approach for years. Also, we have yes means yes in some of the Nordic states, and also in Greece, for example. And my best case scenario that I always like to give in this context is not based in the European Union, but in Canada, because they have a consent-based approach that has been introduced before I was even born. And I think society still works in Canada, and I think they also have like the same rule of law standards that we have. So this shows a consent-based approach does work in so many other countries. So why shouldn't it work in Germany? And also, when it comes to Germany, I think we took on a really bad role in the European Union, because they had been this approach for consent-based approach for the whole EU in 2022. And Germany was, back in the days with France, one of the countries who blocked the yes means yes approach on a European level. And I think this is really something that we need to talk about more in Germany, because when I tell people about it, most people have never heard about this before and never saw that we were the ones who stopped this this big chance that we had on a European level years ago.
I actually also didn't know that, so that was news to me too. And with all you said, I have like a lot of questions right now. So maybe let's start with the first one. So you said that France adopted this yes means yes approach after the Giselle Pelicot case. Do you think that the recent case in Germany about Colleen Fernandez will have a similar influence on the bill currently being discussed?
I think people don't make the instant connection, because when we talk about the case of Colleen Fernandez, we often talk about digital violence. And in that case, I would say yes, the case helped us to also bring forward the bill that we introduced to better protect women in cases of digital violence, and especially in pornographic deepfakes. But I think most people don't see the connection between the digital violence and the violence that takes part in the non-digital world. So that makes it harder for us to show that the particle structures that enabled the case of Colleen Fernandez also take place when we talk about sexual assault in real life. But we see that we have a higher interest also from the German media on these topics in general at the moment. So it helps us in a way, but I think we cannot compare the cases from Colleen Fernandez and the case of Giselle Pelicot. But we had a similar case to Giselle Pelicot last year in January. We had a big research from a German media magazine, Steuerung F, and they also showed that there are a lot of Telegram groups in Germany where people share media of women that became victim of a sexual assault. And even we had this big media covering about this topic, but still there was no social movement following after it. So I think Germany is really slow when it comes to reacting to these cases, even if the cases are big and everyone knows what's going on.
I do remember, now that you mentioned it, I do remember that from last January, but you're right, there was no real long-term media outrage about it, like about other cases in other parts of the world. My second question is also about influencing the bill or passing the bill. Do you think that the fact that the EU just signed on this bill will influence if it will be adopted in Germany too?
Yeah, I think it was a really important sign that the European Parliament accepted this bill. I mean, we had in 2022, when Germany stopped the consent-based legislation on a European level, they said it was because the EU doesn't have a mandate to, or cannot make such a bill on a European level, because criminal law is nothing that we have like harmonized by the European Union. But a lot of lawyers and also the Women Lawyers Association that I worked with at that time showed that we actually, the EU has the legal competence to pass such a legislation. But I think it's nevertheless, if we leave out the question of the competence, it's still a really important signal that we see most countries in the European Union agree that we need a consent-based approach. And it also something that gave me in the parliamentary discussion, a really good position, because the conservatives in the German Bundestag, they spoke against the bill that I presented to a consent-based approach. But the conservatives in the European Parliament, they also said yes to the bill. So I now have the chance to go to my colleagues from the Conservative Party and say, hey, your colleagues in the European Parliament, they really want a consent-based approach. Let's talk about it. Maybe we can change something in the German legislation. So for me, as not being part of the government, it was really important that we had this bill.
Mm-hmm. Best of luck with that.
Yeah.
What do you think is the reason that the bill was blocked in 2022? You said, and now it has been adopted. What changed in those 4 years that now the majority voted for it?
So it never came to a vote in 2022. It was blocked before, and it was also what now was decided in European Parliament is just a bill that it's not legally binding. So they just asked the Commission to present a bill with a yes means yes approach. And the situation was different in 2022. But I think what was really different is that in Germany, the judiciary minister that we had at that time, he didn't want a yes means yes approach, and he looked for a way out. And the way out was to say there's no competence for the EU. And at that time, he stopped the bill with this argumentation. But now we have the parliament deciding on it, and the parliament had a different view. And I also think that the parliament had a different view on it 2022. So if the bill had come into the European Parliament 4 years ago, I think the parliament would also have said yes to the bill. So we didn't have like a change in views, but we have now different approaches. Now the approach is coming from the parliament and not from the commission. And I think that what makes it different, or what makes the difference. But also now nothing can happen. So the commission now has to make a move, and they don't have to make a move. So they can just look at the bill and say, yeah, that's a good idea, but we will work on it some other year. And so as Germany, we shouldn't wait for the European Union to put this pressure on us. We should move on nevertheless what the European Union does, and state a good example that we don't have to wait for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You said before that in 2022 it was blocked also because of the question of the competence. Like, can the EU actually influence national criminal law in that way? We often see that, especially when we talk about, for example, sexual harassment in digital spaces now, or cases where the sexual assault has this kind of digital part to it, that they do not stay confined in like the borders of one nation. But obviously, the digital space is there are no borders, so everyone has access to it. It can be shared everywhere, and it then spans over different countries and different jurisdictions. How does one navigate such a space?
Yeah. I think it doesn't make sense to differentiate the cases if the crime is committed online or if the crime is not committed online. And I think that also this is not how it works at the moment, because when we look at which EU guidelines are currently in debate, we have the guideline to protect children and youth from sexual violence, and this shows that the EU sometimes says, okay, we have a competence for this, and then they find a reason why they have a competence for this. And when it comes to children or youth, they see a competence. When we have digital violence, they see a competence. And I think in the end, this all belongs together to one big system of patriarchal violence, and so we should all treat it in the same way. And then we also, looking at the European Union, would not have different standards to protect your fundamental rights. And it does not depend on whether you're in France, Italy, or Germany. And I think this is something that we should aim at as a European Union and look at as Europeans, to have the same protection all over the continent.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that sure would be a very good system to have if you know that no matter where you are, it's the same standards, it's the same response. A while ago, you mentioned that in Gen Z, we see a lot of conservative values, especially in young men. Why do you think that is, and how do you think we as a society should answer that?
Yeah, I think that we see that views like that are easily distributed through social media, and especially young people who are looking for their identity, who they want to be in the world, see this, and it maybe gives them some sort of identification. So they see these videos of like alpha males or the manosphere, and they see something that they can identify with. And if we as a society don't take the chance to give them something they can identify with in the real world, people will look online to find something they can identify with. And then they will find an environment where predatory behavior is shielded. And behaviors like catcalling they are not recognized as violence by the perpetrators, and they will not be identified as perpetrators, but the behavior will be seen as something normal there. And then we have peer group complicity. So you meet people that also share these views and also see that how they talk about women, how they talk about queer people. Then we have a systematic issue. And a systematic issue we can only tackle systematically with our whole society. And we have to empower people to find an identity that is not based on patriarchal structures, because also men suffer from patriarchal structures, and especially young men suffer from it because they cannot become who they want to be, because there is a box for them where they have to fit in, and either they do fit in or they're not part of the group. So I think, of course, one thing would be to give stronger rules to social media platforms, and to tell them to show how their algorithms work, or what content do they play out, especially to young people. I think this would be one thing, but also our role as politicians or as a society is to give these people something they can identify with, and give them the strength to find their place in the world, which does not include violence against women or gender-based violence. But I think this is a great task. If I knew an easy answer for this, I would take it. So I think it's a really complicated topic.
Yeah. I recently also had a talk with one of your colleagues from the CDU, from the Kinderkommission. And we talked specifically about how algorithms work and how to protect children and teenagers from falling into these bubbles of different ideologies. So that is a very complicated task.
It is.
Yeah. I see that we don't have a lot of time left, so maybe let's finish this off, what is something you would tell young people, young listeners about these topics? What is very important to you that they know?
I think it's always important to talk about it and to raise awareness. Gender-based violence is something that happens or can happen in every family. It does not know ethnicity, or it does not know social standards, or it does not know income. So if something happens to you or your friends, talk to them and don't ignore it. And it's nothing that the person who becomes a victim of gender-based violence should feel bad about, because as Giselle Pellicot told us, the shame has to be on the side of the people who or the person who does or commits the crime. And also, what I found really important for me becoming a lawyer was that the status quo can be changed. So the way that we see the world now, or that we find our laws now, current status, can be changed, but we need people to change it. We need people in every places in the civil society, and in parliaments, and also in local parliaments. And if you want to do something but you don't know how to act on it, it also helps to share content on social media about this topic, or to find small organizations and support them. Also, you can write your local MPs about this topic and say, hey, I would be really in favor of a consent-based approach. What are you doing on this topic at the moment? Because we get to see these emails. I know what people email me every day, and of course I care about what people expect from me. And also, most important, stay alert in your social circuits, and try to always stay with the victims and give the victims a voice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Maybe one last question. If we were to have another talk in 10 years, what do you hope we would have accomplished by then?
Of course, first of all, I would love to see a yes means yes approach in German legislation at that point. But also, I would be really happy to see an increase in the funding and the resources to expand protection services and long-term recovery programs for survivors. And I would also be happy if we would have more programs for potential offenders and also the victims of sexual violence. And I would love to see stronger judicial efficiency and efficiency in the police to ensure that we have thorough investigations and higher conviction rates, and also trials that do not re-traumatize the victims of gender-based violence. And yeah, all in all, I would love to see that we live in a society that has or was able to build more trust for the victims in our institutions, so that they feel empowered to come forward, report incidents to the local authorities.
That sounds like a very nice future, and I really hope we will accomplish that. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us and to explain all of this to me and to our listeners. And I hope you will have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.